What's up, y'all? Today I'm going to talk about real estate agents. A great real estate agent is vital to your team and can make you a lot of money, and more importantly, can prevent you from losing money. On my call earlier this week in a community, I'm part of a real estate community where we have a lot of new and experienced investors, and we have a weekly call. And on that call earlier this week, we talked through a situation where a student is likely going to lose her EMD because she's in breach of contract. And it's not a ton of money, but it's money that could have been prevented. And while the person who signs an agreement, if you're an investor and you're buying a house and your name or your company's name is on a contract, you are ultimately accountable. But if this student had an experienced agent, then this would have never happened. So I was thinking about that, and it made me want to make this episode, which is going to cover exactly what a great real estate agent does so that you can have perspective. Because if you're newer, you probably don't know what the value of a great real estate agent is. And when I was newer, I didn't know, and I had to wait until I found a great real estate agent to understand how valuable they actually were. And for the record, too, there is nothing wrong with an inexperienced hustler agent. In fact, I bought my first 20 houses with an inexperienced hustler, and that was very helpful. You should simply be aware of what a lack of experience could lead so that you have the ability to catch anything that might be missing from an inexperienced agent. If you are new to the channel, my name is Ryan Rice. I'm a full-time real estate investor. I'm also a licensed agent, and I share all of this stuff with the hopes that it can help make you some more money and prevent you from losing money. So here's the story of the student within the community this week. She submitted an offer, did her inspection, and after the inspection, she had to get a significant price reduction in order for it to actually work. What she expected from a renovation perspective was not nearly as much of what actually after the contractor went through the house, what the actual cost was going to be. And so on her final day of inspection, what she did is she submitted a counteroffer to the seller. And there was no deadline on the counteroffer. And so what happened is the seller didn't act on the counteroffer by the end of day, and then the inspection period expired. And the seller said, well, now you're in breach of contract. I won't sign a mutual release. You need to give me your EMD. And technically, the seller is accurate. The buyer is in breach of contract because the contract was not terminated by or within the inspection period. Now, on top of that, the buyer shared that the seller's agent shared that the seller was pissed because the counteroffer was a quote egregiously low price, and it made the seller angry. And so when you have an angry seller and you are in breach of contract, they're more likely to make you cough up your EMD, right? If the seller thought that everything was in good faith and maybe there was just a unintentional mistake and wasn't upset, then maybe the seller could give grace and just sign the mutual release. But in this case, the seller was also pissed. Now, what we discussed, that buyer is ultimately 100% accountable for all of that, right? The buyer is responsible for reading the contract, reading the counter, understanding what happens, and making sure that the buyer understands the full scope of the contract. However, if that buyer was represented by an experienced agent, this would have never happened for a couple reasons. One, the experienced agent would have said, hey, we can counter, but let's put an expiration on the counter, and let's write in the counter that, hey, if this is not accepted or responded to by the end of tonight, then this contract is hereby terminated, right? And then the buyer is covered. But because that didn't happen and the buyer was just unaware, she's probably going to lose her EMD. And so that story is what led me to where I am now. And I want to make sure you guys really understand the value of a good agent. And let me comment first on the perception of agents. Because there are thousands and thousands of real estate agents, and 90% of them either are inexperienced or are trying to do it as a side hustle or just don't really know what they're doing, and 10% of them account for the vast majority of actual real estate sales and purchases, then they, rightly so, can get a bad rep. Because the common thing I hear is, well, what does a real estate agent do? They put a sign in the yard and then they sell the house. And because there are so many real estate agents and the bar for entry is so low, I think that's a fair argument, because the majority of them, that's actually what happens. But if you have really good ones, their value is incredible and they're well worth whatever commission that you're paying them. And the primary number one value of a great real estate agent is negotiation. And there are two crucial points of negotiation that take place in a real estate transaction. One is at the time of contract, and two is at the time of a request to remedy after the inspection period. And the story that I just told falls under the second category there, the time of request post-inspection. So let's dive into both of these. I'm going to start with the time of contract. And I will start by telling a quick story about a recent deal that we just wrapped up last month. I hired an amazing real estate agent for this deal. And for perspective, when I say amazing, last year I think he did like 225 plus transactions just on his own personal sales. When you do that much volume, you kind of, figure out what you're doing, right? So volume in and of itself is a great indication of someone who is going to know what they're doing. So we had this deal, and it was where I needed to list the house to make decent money was a little borderline. It wasn't, I didn't facilitate the deal well enough to where I'm able to list it aggressively and take the chance that if it sells at the price of where I listed aggressively, I can make some money. The aggressive price of where we needed to list it, if I sold it there, then it's likely it was going to be more of a break-even deal. And so we listed it a little bit higher on the threshold than what I typically like to do. Now, the upside is this was a great house in a really, really desirable area. And we got a decent amount of showings, but over the first several days of showings, we didn't really get any. Well, I backtrack. We did get some offers, but they were nowhere close to where we needed to be. If I accepted those offers, I would have taken a loss on the deal, which of course I wanted to avoid. Because of how much traction that we were getting, though, we knew that we were getting a lot of attention. We knew that we were getting a lot of traffic. And so we decided to give it a little bit more time because we were just consistently getting showings. Well, that panned out, and we finally got a buyer who was legitimately interested. And this buyer submitted an offer. And it was a decent offer. Had we accepted, I think I would have made like 10 to 12 grand, which is not great. But at least I know that if I accept this offer, then it's likely that I'm at least gonna come out on top a little bit and make a buck or two. Well, because we were still getting significant showing traffic, the agent just did a masterful job of keeping this offer engaged while not yet accepting, because we still had some showings lined up, and this offer was putting pressure on us to accept because it was a hot area. That buyer knew that it was a desirable house. She wanted to lock it up so that she didn't lose it. Well, time passed, and we got this other buyer interested, and it happened to be this really, really, for lack of a better term, really, really rich buyer that was in the same neighborhood and wanted to just park his money somewhere so that he could eventually flip it or whatever he wanted to do with it. And what was so masterful about the agent that I worked with, the amount of time that went by between the time that we got the offer and the time that we engaged the second buyer, it was uncomfortable to me. I was like, man, I really don't want to lose this offer. The other offers that we got, I'd have to lose money. This one, at least I'm making a buck. Oh, I'm kind of uncomfortable here. But he just did such a masterful job. And part of why he did a masterful job, he's also just really busy because he has 200 something transactions, and the other agent knew that he's really busy. She gave him some grace. So this agent has a reputation in this area, and because of the reputation that he has, everyone knows that he's great. He's a great human. He's a great individual, and he's very good at what he does. And that in and of itself comes with a great, when you have a great reputation and buyer's agents know who you are, then that's another leg up in terms of your negotiating power. And so the second buyer is engaged, and once again, my agent does a phenomenal, masterful job of negotiating and goes back and forth a little bit and tries to see if the original buyer will come up based on the second buyer's offer when the second buyer finally submitted an offer. Well, the first buyer said, no, sorry, that's the max I can do. And what my agent did is leveraged the fact that we had this other offer and interest to get this other buyer, the second buyer, to submit an offer that ended up being 10 to 12 grand higher of a net than had we accepted the original offer. And 10 to 12 grand is pretty meaningful. And, the first buyer wasn't willing to go up, but because the agent was so skilled in his negotiation ability, we got the second buyer, even though the first buyer was capped out and was essentially like, nah, I'm good. The second buyer ended up paying an additional 10 to 12 grand, actually paid cash. And the most masterful part of this negotiation is the agent leveraged the other interest, all of the cumulative interest that we had over the course of the listing, and got the second buyer to completely waive all of their inspections. And they had a high EMD. It was a cash purchase. So with a waived inspection, we knew worst case scenario is the buyer backs out and we get, I think it was like a $5,000 EMD. And so I think it was maybe a 3-week close, 3 weeks passed. We closed the deal. I ended up making 25 grand on a deal where I was a little nervous when we were listing it that I may have to break even on this deal. And even the fact that we got this first offer, which the agent, I didn't mention this before, but the agent really did a phenomenal job of making sure the first offer was sufficient to where we needed to be. In fact, I forgot to tell this important point. That first offer, actually, the first offer that we received, they submitted a number prior that I think was like 50 grand less than where they ended up being. And my agent just did a great job of getting that first buyer up $50,000 to submit their actual offer. So that's an important fact that I missed. And so the outcome there was great and directly attributed to my agent being an excellent negotiator. I made 25 grand. And I do believe that if I had an agent who was inexperienced and I wasn't experienced and I wasn't involved, that deal could have likely not only been a break even, it could have been a loss. And that is the difference. And I happily paid him his commission and I got to walk away with 25 grand. And that story happens all of the time in real estate with a great real estate agent. And think about how many real estate agents out there who are inexperienced, and think about how many opportunities are being missed if in that same exact scenario, if that agent was inexperienced, there's no way in hell that the similar outcome would have occurred. And so the first part of the incredible value of a great real estate agent is at the time of contract. And I think that story illustrates it perfectly. If an agent has negotiated hundreds and hundreds of real estate transactions over time, they're going to understand, okay, well, what did I do on this transaction that went really well? What did I do on this transaction that didn't go as well? And they're going to learn. And so as long as the agent is skilled at the ability to influence and they have the ability to learn based off their iterations of going into contract, then they're going to get really, really good at negotiating at time of contract. And it's so crucial. The lack of that skill can be the difference between tens of thousands of dollars. And those are tens and thousands of your dollars if you own a house and you're hiring a real estate agent to sell it for you. And so just know, if you hire a real estate agent to sell your house, everything that we just talked about is not happening if that agent is inexperienced. And think about the value that you're missing out there. And one thing I didn't talk about is in order to get to that point, there needs to be a good listing strategy. And I kind of bucket that into at the time of contract, because if there is not a great listing strategy, then all of that wouldn't have happened to begin with. We got significant foot traffic, and because of the foot traffic that we got, we were able to put two buyers against each other, drive up the price, and able to make it a decent deal. The second crucial part of negotiation is at the time of remedy. When I say at the time of remedy, what I mean is you've, and by the way, this is for a buyer or a seller, but it's after the inspection is done and the buyer wants to submit a request to remedy, and then if it's on the seller, dealing with the buyer's request to remedy on the seller side. Now, the story that I told at the beginning of the podcast was on the buyer side, so I think that illustrates pretty well the importance of having an experienced agent. So I'm going to kind of come at this from a listing agent and the value of you hiring an experienced agent to list and sell your home at the time of remedy. The first point of negotiation at the time of remedy is if you have a really experienced agent, they're going to have a lot of conversation with the buyer's agent in regards to inspection without you even being involved. And here's what a lot of that conversation looks like. Maybe at the time of contract, if there's a lot of activity on the listing, the listing agent might say something like, hey, before we accept this offer, the seller, number one, super appreciative of your offer. The seller wants to make sure that he conveys his gratitude. We have a lot of activity on this listing, and he's a little hesitant to accept the offer, and then you guys ask for a bunch of inspection items. And so I just want to kind of set the expectation up front, like due to the demand, we're probably not going to fix a whole bunch of stuff. And that's, of course, only if you have that demand, right? So if you have that demand, if the agent is not saying that, and there's a significant amount of activity, regardless of your intent to actually follow through on those statements and not fixing a bunch, you might have the mindset of, okay, I don't care what I need to do to sell this house, I will fix whatever. But if there's a lot of activity, then you can leverage the activity to just set that expectation up front. And then the buyer's agent doesn't know. So the buyer's agent is just going to go to their client, just say, hey, they're in, but they just, they will sign the agreement, but they just kind of want to set the expectation. They're not going to fix a whole bunch of stuff. And then the buyer goes in to the transaction knowing that, okay, I'm going to do a home inspection, but if there's nothing crazy, I probably am not going to be able to submit a bunch of stuff. And so just having those background conversations up front can be super helpful. And there's no, you're not even involved. If you have a great agent, you don't even know that these communications are taking place. The second part of negotiation at the time of remedy is, okay, so the buyer has done an inspection. They submit a request to remedy, which is a list of things that you need to fix. A great real estate agent, number one, similar to what I said in the first part, is that your listing agent is going to have some good conversation, right? If they get a list and it doesn't align with if there was a conversation with the buyer's agent up front that said, hey, there's a lot of activity, we're not going to fix a bunch, and then they give you a list, then it's full of stuff. Well, then without you even having to do anything, the agent's just going to pick up the phone and call and be like, hey, this is not congruent with what we talked about. What's going on? And then at least the buyer can explain context, and the more information that the buyer gives, the better that you're able to leverage the situation and navigate it appropriately. But let's say, so you get the RTR and your agent brings it to you. A great agent, without you saying anything, is going to say, hey, what I'm going to do with this request or remedy is I'm going to reword everything that they've done. First, we'll go through it together, figure out, you tell me what you want to fix. I will make a suggestion on what I would fix if I were you. And that's a great point there. A great real estate agent is going to, based on his experience or her experience, is going to give you the things that have made or break, have made or broken a deal in the past, and say, hey, these are kind of the big things that are common occurrences or common concerns. I would suggest that you fix these things. That saves you the time of having to go through the list and deliberate, okay, which things do I actually want to fix? A great experienced agent is going to give you a recommendation. And then based on what you're willing to fix, they're going to say, okay, great. We have our list of things that we're willing to do. I'm now going to reword each individual item so that there is no chance that when the thing is fixed, the buyer can come back and say, well, I'm not happy with how this was fixed. And so I'm not agreeing until more action is taken. And that's a common thing that I see, right? Buyers will typically write a request a remedy and they'll either word it one, word for word, how an inspector listed it on an inspection, or two, they'll word it so that the buyer has the leverage so that if they're not happy, they can request additional action until they are happy. A great listing agent is going to say, nope, we are not doing that. And I'm going to reword this so it is very clear the specific action items that will be taken. And that way we can prove that those action items were taken and the request to remedy is satisfied. So let me give you an example. And I'll actually give you two examples. We'll give a more simple one and then we'll give a more complex one. Let's start with a simple. Let's say that the home inspector found some sort of HVAC issue. And they noted on the home inspection that, let's say that the HVAC, when I tested the AC, it doesn't get below a certain degrees or something like that. And so the buyer submitted on their request to remedy, per section 1.2, fix the HVAC unit, right? And that's what they put. Well, fix the HVAC unit is so arbitrary. That could mean so many different things. And even though that specific inspection number was referenced, you could go try to remedy what that specific inspection number was, but the request to remedy said fix the HVAC unit. And so if you go address that specific thing, and then they hire an inspector to go back out after you have fixed it, and there is another issue, well, they could argue, well, it said fix the HVAC unit. You need to fix it. And then you're kind of in this gray area of like, okay, are they going to blow up the deal for this? This is kind of annoying. Technically, it does say fix the HVAC unit. What do I do? And then you can either choose to, one, just fix it, or two, get in an argument and risk losing the deal. And so what a great agent will do is instead of fix the HVAC unit, they'll cross through it and they'll rewrite, send licensed HVAC contractor out to evaluate the HVAC unit and fix suggested remedies or fix whatever the HVAC unit finds. And they would word that appropriately. But that is a very specific behavior that you do that and you provide proof, then no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome is, they can send another inspector out all they want. You have checked your box. You have done what you need to do and your responsibilities are over. And so making sure that whatever you're fixing is written very clearly as a very specific behavior that once it's proven that that specific behavior was done, you can check it and you have no further responsibilities. So let me give a second example that is a little bit more complex. Let's say you have a basement and it was raining really, really heavily during the time of when the home inspector was out. And the home inspector noted that there was a little bit of water seeping through in your basement at the time of inspection. Well, that could be a very complex issue. It could be a gutter issue. It could be a leak issue. It could be a grading issue. It could be maybe you need a French drain. I mean, there could be so many issues that could be causing that. And so let's say they put in their request to remedy, fix leaking basement. And you're like, oh my gosh. Well, a great agent is going to say, okay, let's see if we can evaluate what the actual problem is. And let's say either the agent or a foundation contractor, someone goes out and assesses the actual issue. And they say, okay, look, number one, right where the water is leaking in, the downspout doesn't have an extender. And so the water is all draining right at the base of the foundation. So my bet is if we put an extender, that's going to help. And there's also this slight grade toward the house. And so if we regrade and make the dirt close to the house higher than the dirt that's further away from the house, then that water has a natural path to flow away from the house. And so that's probably the issue. And so then what your great agent is going to do is they're going to cross through, fix the leaky basement, and they're going to write, seller will regrade the property, and seller will put a extender, a 6-foot extender on the downspout that is in that corner of the exterior. And then you can go execute those two behaviors. You put dirt, you put the extender, and then your responsibilities are over. And most buyers are going to see that and be like, okay, yeah, those actions make sense. I will accept the fact that you are going to take those actions. And then you take them, boom, you check the box. And once that's done, and you can snap a couple photos to prove that that's done, your responsibilities for that issue are over. And you don't have to get into this, argument of what the right thing does. Because the worst case scenario in that example is, let's say you agree to fix the leaky basement. You go out and assess, and it's the same scenario. And then you grade and you extend the downspout. But then after you do that, they send another inspector out, and the inspector's like, oh no, a French drain has to be installed. Whether or not the inspector knows what they're talking about or not, they're going to scare the shit out of their buyer. And that buyer's going to be like, oh no, well, it says fix the leaky basement. This inspector says you need to install a French drain. He knows better than I do, so I need you to install a French drain. And then you're in this spot, right? You can either, one, get into an argument and risk losing the deal, or two, you might have to cough up an extra several $1,000s to dig a darn French drain in the basement. And so this is such a crucial step of negotiating the request a remedy. And if you have an inexperienced agent, none of this will take place. What I see most commonly happen is the buyer submits a request a remedy, and an inexperienced listing agent takes it to the seller. It's like, well, here's what they want to do. What do you want to do? Right? And you're like, wait, what? Did you even talk to them? And when I've had inexperienced agents, that's exactly what happens. Without the listing agent having any conversation at all with the buyer's agent, they just get the list and they're like, hey, what do you want to do? And they put all of the responsibility on you because they're inexperienced and they don't know what to do. Versus a very experienced agent, they're going to get the list. They're going to call the buying agent before they even talk to you and be like, hey, yo, dude, what's up with this list? Can you give more context? What's up with this one? What's up with this one? And then when they finally bring to you with all of the context, they're going to say, hey, here's what I would suggest. Here's what we should do. All right, you agree that you want to fix that? Okay, let me reword. Let me cross everything out. We'll reword it, and I'll send this back. Right? That is a huge responsibility and lift off your shoulders, because if you don't know what you're doing and that doesn't happen, you have significantly greater liability, and it could cost you thousands of dollars in potential fixes, or it could cost you having to go back to market. And there are so many deals during request a remedy that go back to market because the listing agent is inexperienced and they don't know how to handle that situation. And if the buyer's agent is experienced and the listing agent is inexperienced, man, that buyer's agent is going to eat that listing agent up, and that buyer's agent will get all of the leverage. But a great listing agent is going to know how bad that buyer wants the property based on all the context, based on the situation. Is the buyer moving? Have they already sold their house? Like, just gathering all of the important information that if an inexperienced agent doesn't do those things, then man, that seller, you as a seller, are going to be giving up a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of leverage. And so there you have it. We went really deep here, and hopefully that was helpful for you guys to understand how important a great real estate agent is. And they are worth every penny of incredible negotiation. So get a good one, happily pay them what they're worth. And look, if you know an investor, especially an inexperienced investor out there, and hearing this would help them, please send this to them. I think there are a lot of new investors out there who don't know a lot of this information, and not knowing it could cost them a lot of money. So do your investor friends a favor, send this to them. And if you're a realtor, send this to your realtor friends, because maybe a less experienced realtor hearing this might help them, like, ooh, I got to get better at that. Ooh, I got to get better at that. And together we can help make the realtor community even better. And if you're a rock star realtor, if you have anything to add, let me know. But I appreciate you guys listening. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.